The way Rachel's face transformed from composed corporate confidence to shocked disbelief made every sleepless night of the past 3 years absolutely worth it. For just a split second, her perfect CEO mask slipped when I slid the final acquisition paperwork across the polished conference table. Those documents meant her once mighty tech company, the pride of our family, the golden child of Silicon Valley investors, now belonged to me. The little sister she'd written off as too analytical and not business-minded enough was now her boss. "These just need your signature on pages 4, 11, and the final page," I said, my voice steady despite the drumming of my heart against my ribs. The lawyers and executives around us shuffled papers and checked their watches, oblivious to the weight of history between us. But Rachel knew. Behind her practiced smile, I could see her mentally replaying every dismissive comment, every family dinner where she'd talked over me, every time she'd told our parents my ideas were cute but impractical. I hadn't planned for this moment. I never started my company with the goal of revenge or vindication. But as Rachel picked up the Mont Blanc pen her board had given her after their first major funding round, the same day she'd sent me a condescending, "hang in there" text about my hobby business, I couldn't deny the poetry of it all. "Congratulations, Morgan," she said tightly as she signed the last page. "I guess you proved me wrong." 3 little words, 3 years in the making. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up with Rachel Barrett as my older sister meant living in a constant shadow. She was everything our parents valued: assertive, charismatic, the kind of natural leader who was elected class president 3 years running. I was the quiet one, the one who'd rather build computer systems than student council campaigns, the one who noticed patterns while Rachel commanded rooms. Our childhood home in Minneapolis was a shrine to Rachel's achievements: debate team trophies, newspaper clippings about her startups in college, the framed Forbes 30 Under 30 article that our mother had professionally mounted. My perfect SAT scores and programming awards were mentioned in passing, if at all. Not because our parents didn't love me, but because Rachel's accomplishments were simply louder, more visible in a world that rewards showmanship over substance. I never resented her success. What hurt was how she wielded it, like a weapon to remind me of my place. The carefully composed texts checking if I was still doing that data thing whenever she closed a new funding round. The way she'd interrupt me at family gatherings to translate what Morgan means as if my ideas needed her validation to matter. Even after graduating with honors in computer science from MIT, I still found myself trying to impress her. Some childhood dynamics never fully dissolve, no matter how many degrees or achievements you accumulate. So when I discovered a fundamental inefficiency in how healthcare systems shared critical patient data during my consulting work, my first instinct was to call Rachel. "Healthcare data integration? Seriously?" She'd laughed over our video call, her San Francisco apartment gleaming with minimalist furniture in the background. "Morgan, healthcare tech is a graveyard of failed startups. The regulations alone will eat you alive." "But this is different," I insisted, trying to explain how my system could reduce medication errors by 78% while cutting administrative costs. "I've already built a working prototype and—" "Listen to yourself," she interrupted, that familiar patronizing tone creeping in. "Working prototype? You need market validation, investor interest, a co-founder with healthcare connections. This isn't building a website for Mom's book club." "I have connections from my consulting work," I countered, feeling my confidence waver despite myself. "And early interest from 2 hospitals in—" "2 hospitals? That's cute." She sipped her kombucha, perfectly at ease delivering judgment. "You need scale to matter in healthcare. But hey, if this is something you need to get out of your system before joining a real company, go for it." Maybe you'll learn something useful for when you eventually apply to work at HealthStream. HealthStream, her company, the golden child of health tech startups, according to the industry press. Rachel had launched it 2 years earlier, focusing on consumer fitness wearables that sent customized workout plans. Nothing revolutionary, but her marketing made it sound like she'd invented exercise itself. Their latest product was moving into meditation guidance and sleep tracking, crowded spaces with dozens of competitors, but Rachel had convinced investors she had the secret sauce. "I'm not interested in joining HealthStream," I said quietly. "Well, the door's always open," she replied with the smile she used in media interviews. "Family discount on the executive training program." That night, I sat in my small Minneapolis apartment, staring at my prototype's code on one screen and Rachel's Instagram on another. Her latest post showed her at a tech conference, arm around a famous venture capitalist, caption reading, "When your Series B lead investor becomes your mentor. Blessed, chucked female founders, chucked disruption." Something crystallized in me that night. A quiet, steady resolve that felt different from the desperate need for approval I'd carried for years. I closed her Instagram, opened my project files, and got back to work. If Rachel couldn't see the value in what I was building, I would find people who could. Dr. Elaine Chen found me, actually. A renowned hospital administrator who'd attended a small healthcare innovation workshop where I'd demonstrated my prototype. She approached me afterward, her practical Oxfords and no-nonsense Bob a stark contrast to the polished venture capitalists who'd passed through without a second glance. "Your integration approach is the first sensible solution I've seen in 15 years of healthcare administration," she said. "No preamble or small talk. Everyone else is trying to build fancy new systems without understanding why the old ones fail. You're building bridges instead of islands." Over coffee in the convention center's generic cafe, Dr. Chen asked questions no one else had thought to ask about implementation timelines, training requirements for medical staff, compatibility with legacy systems. Not once did she ask about my go-to-market strategy or brand story, the things Rachel insisted were essential to startup success. "The healthcare system doesn't need another flashy dashboard or consumer app," Dr. Chen said, stirring her black coffee methodically. "It needs functional solutions to actual problems. Medication errors kill people. Billing inefficiencies bankrupt families. Solve those problems, and the rest follows." She became my first advisor, then my first investor, writing a check from her personal funds that was modest by Silicon Valley standards, but represented tremendous faith from someone who understood the problem space better than any venture capitalist ever could. "I'm not investing in your idea," she told me as she handed over the check. "I'm investing in your approach. You listen before you build. That's rare." With Dr. Chen's guidance, I incorporated MediSync solutions and assembled a small team. 3 engineers I'd worked with in consulting, a nurse practitioner with IT experience, and a hospital billing specialist who understood the administrative maze we were trying to simplify. We worked out of a cramped office in a converted warehouse in Minneapolis's North Loop district, the kind of unimpressive space Rachel would have deemed unbefitting a serious startup. Our first full pilot launched at Hennepin County Medical Center 6 months later. The results exceeded even our projections. 82% reduction in prescription errors, 64% faster patient intake processing, 41% decrease in administrative overhead for nurses. Real numbers solving real problems. Dr. Chen leveraged her network to get us meetings with hospital administrators across the Midwest. Not glamorous coastal institutions with massive endowments, but practical regional medical centers serving communities that couldn't afford mistakes or inefficiencies. We expanded to 5 hospitals, then 12, then 20, all within our first 18 months. I hardly noticed when Rachel's company, HealthStream, announced their $40 million Series C round with splashy coverage in TechCrunch and Bloomberg. I was too busy on site at a rural Wisconsin hospital, personally troubleshooting an integration issue that affected patient care. While Rachel posed for professional photo shoots in her company's new headquarters, I was sleeping on pull-out couches and taking red-eye flights between hospital installations. We were building different kinds of companies, different kinds of success. At least, that's what I told myself. The family dynamics hadn't changed, though. At Thanksgiving dinner that year, my parents still fawned over Rachel's latest press features, while asking me perfunctory questions about how the business is going. When I tried explaining our recent expansion into orthopedic specialty practices, Rachel smoothly interrupted. "Morgan's doing some interesting work with medical databases." She simplified, as if translating a foreign language. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But let me tell you about HealthStream's new mindfulness features. We've partnered with 3 celebrity meditation gurus to create exclusive content." And just like that, the conversation was hers again. I caught my father checking his watch during my updates, but leaning forward eagerly when Rachel mentioned being approached for acquisition talks by a major tech company. Some things never change. Later that night, as I helped my mother with the dishes, she patted my hand in what I'm sure she thought was encouragement. "Don't worry about not having Rachel's knack for business, sweetie. Your job seems very stable. And that's important too." "Mom, I don't have a job. I'm the CEO of my own company." "Yes, of course," she said, clearly not seeing the difference. "And it's wonderful that you're doing so well with your little project. Not everyone needs to be in magazines to be successful." I didn't bother explaining that MediSync had just closed a $5 million funding round led by a healthcare-focused investment firm, or that we'd been profitable for 6 months already, unusual for any startup, let alone one still in its early stages. Some victories aren't meant to be understood by everyone. The text from Rachel came 3 days later. "Saw your website finally got updated, looking more professional. Let me know if you want me to introduce you to my design team for a refresh." I didn't respond. Instead, I channeled that familiar frustration into our Series A pitch deck, refining our growth projections and implementation timelines. Dr. Chen had connected us with Healing Horizons Capital, a venture fund specializing in healthcare infrastructure. Not as famous as the Silicon Valley firms that backed Rachel, but deeply knowledgeable about our actual market. 2 weeks later, we closed our round at twice the valuation we'd initially targeted. The press release got a small mention in a healthcare industry newsletter, nothing like HealthStream's regular features in mainstream tech publications. But hospital administrators across the country noticed. Our sales pipeline tripled overnight. We moved into proper offices, still nothing fancy, but functional space in downtown Minneapolis with enough room for our team of 22. We hired carefully, prioritizing healthcare experience and problem-solving ability over impressive resumes or startup pedigrees. No cold brew on tap or nap pods like the perks Rachel bragged about at HealthStream. Just good health insurance, reasonable hours, and work that actually mattered. Dr. Chen visited our new offices during the unofficial opening gathering, a modest affair with catered sandwiches and sparkling cider. No DJ or branded merchandise like the launch party Rachel had thrown for HealthStream's new headquarters. "You've built something real here," Dr. Chen said, surveying our team as they chatted in small groups. "Something lasting." "We're still small compared to other health tech companies," I admitted. "Size isn't the measure that matters," she replied. "Impact is. Remember that." Impact became our North Star as we expanded. While HealthStream chased consumer trends and market segments, we deepened our integration capabilities and strengthened our security protocols. Rachel's company made headlines with celebrity partnerships and flashy features. We earned trust by solving fundamental problems in patient care coordination. The contrast in our approaches couldn't have been clearer than at the National Health Technology Conference in Chicago that spring. HealthStream had a massive booth with interactive demos. branded stress balls, and a smoothie bar. Rachel worked the room in her signature power suit, moving effortlessly between venture capitalists and industry reporters. Our booth was simple: demonstrations of our actual software solving actual problems, staffed by team members who understood healthcare from the inside out. We didn't attract crowds of casual conference goers collecting swag. Instead, we had in-depth conversations with hospital IT directors and nursing administrators, the people who would actually implement and use our solutions. I was in the middle of explaining our medication reconciliation process to a hospital chain representative when Rachel appeared at our booth, flanked by two of her team members. "Morgan, your booth looks practical," she said, glancing around at our clinical-focused displays. I thought I'd stop by and say hello before my keynote. "I'm discussing the future of consumer-centered healthcare. You should come if you're not too busy." Before I could respond, the hospital representative interrupted. "Are you Morgan Barrett? The one who developed the cross-system patient identifier protocol?" I nodded, surprised. "Your system saved my father's life last month," she said, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. "He was admitted through emergency with an undocumented allergy. Your system flagged the contradiction between his primary care records and the ER admission data before medication was administered." Rachel's smile faltered slightly as the woman continued singing my praises, describing technical details of our system that Rachel clearly didn't understand. For once, she had no way to simplify, translate, or take over the conversation. "Well," she said finally, "I should get ready for my presentation. Morgan, we should catch up later." We didn't catch up. Rachel was too busy networking with investors and posing for industry publications. I was too busy meeting with actual clients and signing contracts. By the end of the conference, MediSync had secured partnerships with 2 major hospital systems, representing over $2 million in annual recurring revenue, while HealthStream had announced a co-branded water bottle. The industry landscape began, shifting 3 months later. Regulatory changes increased scrutiny on health tech companies, particularly those handling sensitive patient data. Our years of investment in security protocols and compliance infrastructure positioned us perfectly for the new environment. Companies that had prioritized growth over governance started struggling, including HealthStream. I heard about their troubles through industry channels first, rumors of missed growth targets and delayed product launches. Then from mutual connections who reported unusual staff turnover and canceled partnership announcements. Rachel's Instagram, once a constant stream of success theater, went conspicuously quiet except for carefully curated throwback posts to earlier victories. The text came on a Tuesday evening as I was reviewing our quarterly financials. "Hey Morg, any chance you're free for dinner next time I'm in Minneapolis? Some business ideas I'd like to bounce off you." Rachel hadn't asked for my input on business ideas since. Well, ever. Something was wrong. I agreed to dinner the following week when she'd be in town for investor meetings, a transparent excuse, as I knew most of HealthStream's investors were based in California and New York. We met at a quiet restaurant in the North Loop, not far from MediSync's first office. Rachel arrived looking polished as ever, but the subtle signs of strain were visible if you knew where to look. The slightly too bright smile, the way she checked her phone more frequently than usual, the tightness around her eyes. After 20 minutes of surface-level catching up and reminiscing, she finally reached the real purpose of our dinner. "The healthcare regulation landscape is challenging right now," she began, choosing her words carefully. "HealthStream is pivoting toward more infrastructure-focused solutions rather than just consumer applications." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "Your compliance frameworks and security protocols are considered best in class," she said, the admission clearly difficult for her. "We've been exploring partnership opportunities with companies that have complementary strengths to ours." Took tremendous effort not to show my surprise. This wasn't just a business conversation. This was Rachel, my always right, never vulnerable older sister, indirectly asking for help. "What kind of partnership are you envisioning?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Co-development on enterprise solutions. HealthStream has brand recognition and consumer reach. MediSync has back-end infrastructure and hospital relationships. Together," she trailed off, letting the implication hang. "Together we'd be formidable," I finished for her. "But Rachel, your company valuation is 4 times ours. Your investors would never approve a true partnership. They'd expect an acquisition with HealthStream as the acquirer." She looked down at her barely touched salmon, then back up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, uncertainty. "That was the original plan," she admitted. "But things have evolved." "Evolved how?" "Our last 2 quarters haven't met projections. Our CAC has tripled while retention has dropped. The regulatory compliance costs alone are." She stopped herself. "Let's just say our board is exploring strategic alternatives." Strategic alternatives. The corporate euphemism for looking for a buyer before we run out of money. "I see," I said, understanding the dinner invitation completely now. "And where do I fit into these alternatives?" "Your company is profitable, growing, and compliance native. Our investors have taken notice." She took a deep breath. "There's a belief that MediSync might be interested in acquiring certain HealthStream assets." "Certain assets, not the whole company. They were breaking it up for parts already." "What do you think about that possibility?" I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective for perhaps the first time in our adult lives. Rachel's carefully maintained facade cracked just slightly. "I think I misjudged some fundamental aspects of this industry and possibly overestimated my own business acumen." Coming from Rachel, this was equivalent to anyone else breaking down completely. I'd never heard her admit misjudgment about anything, let alone something as central to her identity as her business sense. "The consumer health space is difficult," I offered, surprising myself with the gesture of grace. "Trends change quickly, and unit economics are challenging. Whereas hospitals will always need better data systems," she acknowledged. "Your focus was wiser than I recognized." For a moment, we weren't CEO and CEO, rival and rival, or even big sister and little sister. We were just 2 women acknowledging the complicated reality of building companies in a difficult industry. "Send me your current deck and financials," I said finally. "I'll review them with my team." The relief on her face was evident, though. She tried to mask it with professional gratitude. "Of course, I'll have them over tomorrow. And Morgan, thank you for taking the meeting. I know our history is complicated." That might have been the most genuine thing she'd ever said to me. The next month was a whirlwind of due diligence, valuation discussions, and integration planning. MediSync's executive team reviewed HealthStream's assets meticulously, identifying which components aligned with our strategic direction and which would be spun off or wound down. The consumer-facing applications that had been Rachel's pride and joy were among the latter category, unsustainable, in their current form and misaligned with our enterprise focus. What HealthStream did have of value were its data science capabilities, its impressive engineering talent, and its analytics platforms. Extracted from the consumer context and repurposed for clinical applications, these assets could significantly accelerate MediSync's development roadmap. The final acquisition structure proposed by our team was straightforward. MediSync would acquire HealthStream's key technical assets and talent for a combination of cash and equity, representing a significant discount to HealthStream's last valuation, but still providing a face-saving exit for their investors. Rachel and certain members of her executive team would receive transition packages, but would not continue with the combined company long-term. I expected pushback or negotiation from Rachel on these terms. Instead, she accepted them with a professionalism that surprised me. Perhaps failure had taught her something that success never could. Which brought us to this moment, in this conference room, with these papers sliding across the table for her signature. The weight of the signed documents felt heavier than their actual mass as I slid them into my leather portfolio. Rachel was staring at the space where they had been, her manicured fingernails tapping a nervous rhythm on the conference table. The lawyers and executives filed out with practiced efficiency, sensing the need for privacy between us. When the glass door closed behind the last of them, Rachel finally looked up at me. "So that's it?" she said, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. 7 years of my life packaged and sold in a 40-minute meeting. I could have savored the moment, let her sit with the discomfort she'd never afforded me. Instead, I found myself pouring water from the crystal carafe into a glass and sliding it toward her. "Not sold," I corrected gently. "Transformed. The core of what you built will continue, just in a different form." Rachel laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Don't patronize me, Morgan. We both know HealthStream as I conceived it is dead. You're harvesting the organs and discarding the body." Her bluntness was refreshing after weeks of PR-approved language and careful euphemisms. "The consumer application was unsustainable," I said, matching her candor. "But your data architecture and analytics engine are brilliant. That will be the foundation of our clinical decision support system moving forward." "My brilliant data architecture," she repeated, tracing the rim of her water glass. "Not my leadership, not my vision, just my code." "Code outlasts most visions," I replied. "And in healthcare, that's not a small thing." She looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the San Francisco skyline, the golden afternoon light catching the glass and steel of the buildings where she'd once been the toast of the tech elite. The city had embraced her, celebrated her, put her on magazine covers as the face of female entrepreneurship. Now those same publications would analyze her failure with gleeful scrutiny. "What happens tomorrow?" she asked, still looking outward. "Transition announcements, integration planning, the standard corporate choreography." And to me specifically? The question hung between us, layered with meaning beyond the professional. What happens to me now that the identity I've constructed has collapsed? What happens to us, as sisters, now that our roles have so dramatically reversed? "Your transition package includes a generous consulting retainer," I said, answering only the surface level. 3 months minimum to help with knowledge transfer and team integration. "And after those 3 months?" I hesitated. During the acquisition negotiations, I'd maintained professional distance, focusing on the business fundamentals rather than personal dynamics. But sitting here with Rachel, stripped of her usual confidence, I couldn't maintain that separation. "That depends on you," I admitted. "There's no room for 2 CEOs, and MediSync is my company. But there could be a place for your skills in the expanded organization if you're willing to build something new instead of mourning what's lost." She turned back to me, searching my face for signs of pity or triumph. Finding neither, she nodded. "Slightly. I'll consider it." We gathered our things in silence. As we approached the door, Rachel paused with her hand on the handle. "How did you know?" she asked abruptly. "Know what?" "That this would work. Your approach. Everyone in the industry, everyone, said consumer applications were the future of health tech. The enterprise infrastructure market was considered dead-end, unsexy, impossible to scale. How did you know they were all wrong?" I considered deflecting, with a technical answer about market analysis or customer discovery. But the real answer was simpler and more personal. "I didn't know," I admitted. "I just built what made sense to me, what I understood. You followed the crowd. I couldn't. I never knew how." Something shifted in her expression. Recognition. "Perhaps. That used to drive me crazy about you," she said. "You never cared what everyone else was doing. I thought it was a weakness." "It has its moments," I replied with a small smile. She opened the door, and we stepped into the hallway together, an ending and beginning compressed into the same moment. The days following the acquisition announcement were a blur of integration meetings and press obligations. The industry coverage was predictably simplistic. HealthStream acquired by Rising Star Medisync in healthcare tech consolidation. The articles featured quotes from our carefully worded press release, analyses from industry experts who'd previously ignored us, and inevitable comparisons between Rachel and me. Sisters' rivalry ends in acquisition. How Medisync CEO outmaneuvered her more famous sibling read one particularly sensationalized headline. I declined all requests for personal interest stories and profiles, focusing instead on the business rationale for the combination. Rachel, to her credit, maintained dignified silence rather than feeding the narrative. Our parents, predictably, struggled to process this realignment of their daughters' positions. My mother called daily, her concern for Rachel barely disguised as interest in the acquisition. "She's putting on a brave face," Mom said during one call, "but this has been devastating for her. HealthStream was her whole identity." "I know," I replied, watching through my office window as Rachel worked with our integration team, sleeve rolled up and whiteboard marker in hand. She's finding her way through it. She's always been so ambitious, so driven to be the best. Mom continued, a lifetime of favoritism evident in her tone. This must be so hard for her, working for her little sister now. She doesn't work for me, Mom. She's a consultant during the transition. Still, the dynamic. It's not natural. You might consider giving her a more prominent role, something with real authority. She's always been a leader, you know. I bit back the instinctive response that Rachel's leadership had led HealthStream to this position in the first place, and instead said simply, "We're figuring out the right structure as we go." After hanging up, I found myself standing in the doorway of the conference room where Rachel was working, watching her diagram data flows with 3 of our senior engineers. She'd abandoned her usual power suits and designer dresses for jeans, and a simple blouse, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. The engineers were engaged, asking questions and building on her ideas. In this context, stripped of the CEO persona she'd cultivated so carefully, her technical brilliance shone through unobstructed. "The patient matching algorithm needs refinement," she was saying, sketching a decision tree on the whiteboard. "We're still getting false positives when records have similar demographic data, but distinct medical histories. If we incorporate temporal sequencing of past procedures as an additional verification layer." I slipped away before she noticed me, a plan forming in my mind. Later that evening, I requested a private meeting with Rachel in my temporary office at HealthStream headquarters. She arrived punctually, tablet in hand and ready for what she assumed would be another integration discussion. "I've been watching you work with the technical teams," I began, gesturing for her to sit. "You're remarkably effective when focused on the problems rather than the optics." She tensed slightly. "If this is about the advisory role ending early..." "It's the opposite," I interrupted. "I'm considering creating a new position, Chief Data Architect for the combined entity, focused exclusively on rebuilding our entire information architecture to support both clinical and eventually consumer applications, no management responsibilities, no investor relations, no press, just pure problem solving at the highest level." Rachel stared at me, clearly blindsided. "You want me to stay? In a permanent role?" "The role would report directly to our CTO, not to me," I clarified. "Complete technical freedom but clear organizational boundaries. 3-year commitment minimum, and conditional on one personal requirement. Which is, repair our relationship outside of work," I said simply. "Real effort, not for show. Family dinners without competition, holidays without tension, a genuine attempt to understand each other as sisters, not rivals." The request hung between us like a fragile bridge over a deep ravine, precarious, hopeful, transformative if crossed. "Why?" she finally asked. "You won." You could walk away from our personal history completely. Why try to fix it? It was a fair question. The acquisition had given me everything I could have wanted professionally. The validation, the authority, the final proof that my approach had been right all along. I could have used that leverage to maintain distance, to protect myself from the dynamic that had shaped so much of my life. Because winning doesn't heal anything, I said after a moment. And I'm tired of carrying our history like a shield, aren't you? Rachel looked down at her hands, the French manicure she'd maintained religiously throughout HealthStream's rise, and fall still perfect despite everything else that had changed. I don't know if I know how to be your sister without being your competitor, she admitted. It's been our dynamic for so long. Then we'll learn together, I replied, starting with you accepting that I'm offering this role because of your skills, not pity or obligation. You're genuinely the right person for it. She looked up, searching my face for insincerity. Finding none, she nodded slowly. I'd like to see the formal job description before deciding. Of course. I'll have HR prepare it tomorrow. I stood, considering whether to extend my hand to seal the professional agreement, then opted instead for something more personal. I walked around the desk and sat in the chair beside her. In the meantime, how about dinner? Just the two of us, no business talk. I want to hear about the person behind the CEO I've been negotiating with these past months. Her surprise was evident, but after a moment she nodded. I'd like that. That dinner at a quiet restaurant near the Embarcadero marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just for our companies, but for our relationship. Over pasta and wine, we tentatively explored territory we'd avoided for years, childhood memories seen through different lenses, the insecurities that had fueled our competitive dynamic, the pressure, both internal and external, that had shaped our paths. Did you know I almost applied to MIT instead of Stanford? Rachel revealed, swirling her wine thoughtfully. But I couldn't bear the thought of being directly compared to you in your domain. You were always the technical prodigy. I needed to find somewhere I could create my own identity. I thought you chose Stanford because it was more prestigious for business, I admitted. I always assumed your choices were about status. Some were, she acknowledged with surprising candor. But most were about finding spaces where I could excel without your shadow. Ironic, considering I was supposedly the successful sister casting the shadow. We were both reacting to shadows, I reflected, real and imagined. The evening ended without dramatic resolutions or tearful reconciliations. We were still Barry sisters after all, more comfortable with code than emotion. But something had shifted, like the first thaw after a long winter. Possibility where there had been only hardened patterns. The following weeks of integration planning tested this fragile new understanding. Combining two tech companies is never seamless, even under the best circumstances. Cultural clashes, territorial skirmishes, and technological incompatibilities emerged daily. Rachel accepted the chief data architect role, and her presence proved invaluable in navigating the technical complexities of merging our systems. What surprised me most was watching how she adapted to no longer being in charge. After the initial adjustment period, she seemed almost relieved to focus solely on the technical challenges without the burden of investor expectations and market pressures. The Rachel who emerged was more collaborative and creative, willing to admit knowledge gaps and learn from our team members. You're good with her, Dr. Chen observed during one of her visits to the San Francisco office. We were watching Rachel lead a whiteboarding session with engineers from both companies, her natural teaching ability evident in how she clarified complex concepts. She's good at this, I replied. Better than she was at being CEO, honestly. Many founders are, Dr. Chen said, with the wisdom of someone who'd seen countless startups rise and fall. The skills that launch companies aren't always the skills that sustain them. The rare founder recognizes when to step aside from roles that no longer fit. I'm not sure Rachel recognized it so much as had it forced upon her, I pointed out. Perhaps, but she's choosing how to respond to that reality, and doing so with more grace than many would manage. Dr. Chen gave me a knowing look. As are you. Meaning? Victory can be as challenging to navigate as defeat in its way. It would be easy to let this acquisition become about personal vindication rather than business value. You're choosing a more difficult but ultimately more rewarding path. Her observation stayed with me as the integration progressed. There were ample opportunities to emphasize the power dynamic shift between Rachel and me, both professionally and personally. Moments when asserting my authority would have been justified by business necessity, and satisfying to the part of me that remembered every dismissive comment and condescending gesture. Instead, I found myself increasingly focused on building something neither of us could have created alone. MediSync's clinical infrastructure combined with HealthStream's data analytics created possibilities beyond my original vision. Rachel's consumer product instincts, when applied to clinical workflow problems, generated insights our more traditionally minded healthcare team might have missed. 3 months after the acquisition, we presented the combined company's strategy at the National Health Information Technology Conference, the same event where, a year earlier, we had occupied separate booths representing separate visions. Now, we stood together on stage, explaining how our integrated platform would bridge the historical divide between consumer health applications and clinical systems. The future of healthcare technology isn't about choosing between patient engagement and clinical efficacy, I explained to the packed auditorium. It's about creating seamless connections between the two. Patients interact with their own health data through intuitive interfaces, while providers access the same information through clinically optimized systems, Rachel continued, building on my point with natural fluidity. Each view optimized for its user, but drawing from a unified, secure data foundation. Watching her command the technical portion of the presentation, confident yet collaborative, deferring to me on strategic questions while I deferred to her on architectural details, I felt an unexpected emotion. Pride. Not in myself or my company's acquisition, but in what Rachel had become through this challenging transition. In what we were building together, professionally and personally. The audience response validated our combined vision. Hospital CIOs and clinical leaders who had previously viewed consumer health tech with skepticism were engaged and curious. Investors who had followed Rachel's consumer-focused approach began to see the value of enterprise infrastructure. We were redrawing the boundaries of health technology in real time. After the presentation, as we fielded questions from interested health systems and potential partners, I caught our parents standing at the back of the room. They had flown in at my invitation, their first time attending any industry event for either of our companies. My mother's expression was difficult to read, pride mixed with confusion, as if she was still reconciling the daughters on stage with the ones she thought she knew. Later, over dinner at an upscale restaurant near the convention center, our father raised his glass in a toast. "To my brilliant daughters," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Working together at last." Rachel and I exchanged glances. A lifetime of competition and recent months of cautious collaboration condensed into a single look. "It's been an adjustment," Rachel admitted, addressing the elephant in the room with characteristic directness. Learning to see Morgan as a partner rather than just my little sister, recognizing that her approach had merit all along. And, for me, I added, learning that Rachel's vision has value even if her initial execution had flaws, that we're stronger combining our different perspectives than either of us would be alone. Our mother dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. "I always worried about the competition between you two. Feared it would drive you apart permanently." "It almost did," I acknowledged. The acquisition could have been the final wedge. Instead, it became the bridge, Rachel finished, though not without some painful reconstruction. The conversation shifted to more general topics: their flight, the hotel accommodations, plans for the following day. But something fundamental had been acknowledged that had long gone unspoken in our family. The dynamic that had shaped decades of relationships was being rewritten, awkwardly but sincerely. As the integration progressed from strategic planning to operational execution, Rachel and I settled into a productive rhythm. Her role as chief data architect gave her the technical autonomy she craved while maintaining clear boundaries that prevented conflict with my leadership. We established formal communication channels for work issues and deliberately created space for personal connection outside the office. Sunday brunches became our tradition, neutral territory where we could be sisters rather than colleagues. The conversations were tentative at first, weighted with history and habit, but gradually, we found our way toward authentic connection. "Do you remember when we used to build those elaborate domino structures in the basement?" Rachel asked. One Sunday, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "You always insisted on calculating the perfect spacing while I wanted to make them more complex and impressive. And inevitably they'd collapse because I'd get the math slightly wrong, or you'd add one piece too many," I recalled with a smile. "Then we'd blame each other instead of starting over together." "Metaphor for our entire relationship," she observed with surprising insight. Each of us so convinced our approach was the only right one that we couldn't see the value in combining them. "Speaking of combining approaches," I transitioned, careful to maintain the boundary between personal and professional. "The clinical trial with University Hospital starts next week. Your predictive analytics module is central to the study design." Pride flickered across her face, genuine rather than competitive. The team did exceptional work integrating it with the clinical decision support framework. Particularly Sanjay, he has a natural talent for translational interfaces. "He mentioned you've been mentoring him on data visualization principles," I noted. "That kind of knowledge transfer is exactly what we hoped would happen with the integration." Rachel hesitated, then shifted the conversation in an unexpected direction. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd collaborated from the beginning? If instead of founding separate companies, we'd been co-founders of a single venture?" The question caught me off guard. Honestly, I think we would have killed each other within 6 months. We needed to develop independently before we could work together effectively. She laughed, a genuine sound free from the practiced quality her public laugh had always carried. "You're probably right. Neither of us was ready to compromise our vision or share control. We needed this. Humbling." She said the last word softly, testing its weight. "Both of us," I emphasized. "Success can be as blinding as failure." I was so focused on proving my approach was valid that I missed opportunities to incorporate elements of consumer engagement that could have accelerated our adoption. And I was so fixated on growth metrics and press coverage that I neglected the foundational infrastructure needed for long-term sustainability, she acknowledged. Classic oldest and youngest child dynamic, playing out in business form. The waitress arrived with our check, interrupting this moment of mutual understanding. As Rachel reached for her wallet, I waved her off. "My turn," I insisted. "You paid last week." She raised an eyebrow. Morgan Barrett, voluntarily maintaining balanced accounts? The integration really is changing everyone. We laughed together, the sound unremarkable to those around us but revolutionary in the context of our history. 6 months into the integration, we faced our first major crisis as a combined entity. A software update introduced a subtle but dangerous bug in the medication dosing calculator, a core component originating from HealthStream's technology stack. The issue was caught before any patients were affected, but the near miss triggered intense scrutiny from our hospital partners and regulatory observers. I called an emergency meeting of the senior leadership team, including Rachel. Tension filled the conference room as we assessed the situation. Fingers were being pointed, with former MediSync team members implicitly blaming the HealthStream codebase and processes. Before we go further, I said, taking control of the rapidly deteriorating conversation, I want to be clear about our approach. This isn't about assigning blame between legacy organizations. We're one company now, and this is our collective problem to solve. Rachel had been uncharacteristically quiet, reviewing the incident report with intense concentration. Now she looked up, meeting the eyes of team members from both former companies. I designed the original algorithm architecture, she said, her voice steady. While the specific implementation error happened during integration, the underlying vulnerability existed in my original design. The failure to properly handle edge cases in pediatric dosing calculations was my oversight. The room fell silent. Rachel Barrett, who had once carefully managed her image to project infallible confidence, was publicly acknowledging a technical mistake. That said, she continued, I've identified the structural issue and have already outlined a comprehensive solution. She shared her screen, displaying a revised architecture diagram. This approach eliminates the class of errors we encountered while improving performance for standard cases. I studied her proposed solution, impressed by both its technical elegance and the speed with which she'd developed it. How quickly can this be implemented and tested? With appropriate resources, 3 days for implementation, then a week of accelerated testing before deploying to production, she answered. I'd like to lead the effort personally. Approved, I responded immediately. Take whatever resources you need. Jake, manage client communications. Maria, prepare the regulatory disclosure. Everyone else, support Rachel's team however they require. The crisis response kicked into high gear, with Rachel working around the clock to implement her solution. I found her in the office at 2 in the morning, surrounded by empty coffee cups and technical diagrams, collaborating virtually with team members across multiple time zones. You should get some sleep, I advised, placing a fresh coffee on her desk despite my words. She accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. Almost there. 2 more edge cases to address. Then we can start the validation sequence. I pulled up a chair beside her. You didn't have to take public responsibility like that. The issue manifested during integration, which was a shared responsibility. Rachel paused her typing, considering her words carefully. A year ago, I would have managed perceptions, ensured the narrative protected my reputation, but I'm finding there's freedom in accountability, in acknowledging limitations openly and then addressing them directly. It changed the entire tone of the response, I observed, united the team instead of dividing it further. I had a good example, she said, glancing at me briefly before returning to her code. Watching how you've led through this integration, taking responsibility without drama, giving credit generously, focusing on solutions rather than appearances. It's a different kind of leadership than what I practiced at HealthStream. Different. Context require different approaches, I offered, uncomfortable with the praise. Different values too, she corrected gently. You built MediSync on substance over style. I'm beginning to understand why that foundation has proven more durable. The moment of vulnerability between us felt significant, but fragile. Rather than risk saying the wrong thing, I simply asked, how can I help with the solution? Rachel smiled slightly, recognizing and accepting the shift back to practical ground. The validation protocols need review by someone who understands both the clinical workflows and technical implementation. Your perspective would be valuable. We worked side by side until dawn, finding a rhythm in the shared problem-solving that felt both new and oddly familiar, like an adult version of those childhood domino structures, now built with patience and mutual respect rather than competition. The medication calculator issue was resolved without any patient impact, and the incident ultimately strengthened both our technical systems and company culture. The transparent handling of the near miss earned trust from our hospital partners and regulatory authorities, while internally it broke down some of the remaining walls between former HealthStream and MediSync team members. 9 months after the acquisition, we held our first all-company retreat. Over 200 employees gathered at a lakeside conference center outside Minneapolis, neutral territory between HealthStream's former San Francisco base and MediSync's Midwest roots. The agenda: balanced strategic planning sessions with team-building activities designed to continue integrating our cultures. During the opening session, I shared our combined company's vision and first-year achievements. The metrics told a compelling story: integrated platform deployments in 78 hospital systems, reduced medication errors by 84% in participating facilities, decreased administrative burden for nursing staff by 41%. Real-world impact beyond anything either company could have achieved independently. Our success this year reflects the unique strengths both legacy organizations brought to this combination, I concluded. The clinical expertise and infrastructure, foundation from MediSync, combined with the data science innovation and user experience excellence from HealthStream, has created something truly revolutionary in healthcare technology. As I introduced Rachel to present the technical roadmap, I caught our Chief Financial Officer smiling knowingly from the front row. The latest acquisition offers had started arriving 3 weeks earlier. Technology giants and healthcare conglomerates interested in our newly integrated platform. Offers that valued the combined entity at 12 times what HealthStream had been worth before its challenges, 8 times MediSync's pre-acquisition valuation. Rachel took the stage with confident humility. Her presentation focused on the technical achievements of the entire data team rather than her own contributions. As she outlined the architectural vision that would guide our next phase of growth, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought us here. From childhood rivalry to professional competition to reluctant collaboration to genuine partnership, our relationship had evolved through phases neither of us could have predicted. The acquisition that could have been the final chapter in our competition had instead become the first chapter in a more complex and rewarding story. Later that evening, as the team celebrated around a bonfire by the lake, Rachel found me at the edge of the gathering. "I overheard Marcus talking about the acquisition offers," she said, handing me a mug of hot cider. "Impressive numbers." "Very," I agreed, "but I'm not interested in selling." She nodded, unsurprised. "Neither would I be, in your position. You've built something with real staying power." She paused, gazing across the lake. "It's strange to think about how differently things might have turned out if I'd listened to you years ago when you first tried to explain your vision." "I prefer to focus on where we are now," I replied. "Not where we might have been." Rachel smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. The pragmatic sister as always. She raised her cider mug slightly. "To where we are now, then, and to finding our way here, however complicated the journey." I clinked my mug against hers, the simple gesture carrying the weight of our shared history and transforming future. To where we are now. 1 year after the acquisition, MediSync was hosting its first major healthcare innovation summit in Chicago. The grand ballroom of the Lakefront Hotel hummed with activity as hospital administrators, clinicians, and health tech leaders gathered to discuss the future of connected care. Our company logo, the intertwined M and S that represented both our name and the merger of our legacy organizations, adorned the stage where I would soon deliver the keynote address. As I watched from the wings, making last-minute adjustments to my presentation, I spotted Rachel deep in conversation with the Chief Medical Officer of Massachusetts General Hospital. She was animated but focused, using her tablet to demonstrate something technical about our platform's architecture. The CMO nodded with growing enthusiasm, clearly impressed by whatever Rachel was explaining. This was the new Rachel, passionate about the technology itself rather than the status it could confer. Gone were the designer outfits and carefully crafted sound bites that had defined her HealthStream days. She still dressed professionally, but with an understated confidence that came from expertise rather than image management. Her hands moved with precision as she sketched something on her tablet, the CMO leaning in to see better. Dr. Chen appeared beside me, following my gaze. "Your sister has become quite the technical evangelist," she observed. "Several hospital systems have specifically mentioned her architectural vision as a key factor in their decision to adopt our platform." "She's found her element," I agreed. "Solving complex problems without the burden of running the entire company." "And how about you? Have you found your element as the leader of this expanded organization?" I considered the question carefully. The past year had been the most professionally challenging and rewarding of my life, integrating two distinct company cultures, accelerating our technical roadmap while maintaining quality, navigating the complex healthcare regulatory landscape at a larger scale. Each day brought new complexities that stretched my capabilities. "I'm learning," I admitted. "Every day brings something I couldn't have anticipated." Dr. Chen smiled knowingly. "That's how you know you're on the right path. Comfort is the enemy of growth." A member of our events team approached, signaling that it was almost time for my keynote. As I moved toward the stage entrance, Dr. Chen placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. "Consider this," she said quietly. "A year ago, you were consumed with proving yourself against your sister's shadow. Today, you're focused on the impact your company can make in healthcare. That's a profound shift." Her observation stayed with me as I took the stage, looking out at the audience of healthcare leaders who had gathered not because of family drama or startup rivalries, but because they believed in what we were building. The lights momentarily blinded me, and when my vision adjusted, I spotted Rachel taking a seat in the front row, notepad ready, present as a colleague and supporter rather than a competitor. 2 years ago, I began. I sat in a hospital waiting room after my grandfather was admitted for the third time in 2 months with medication complications. As his advocate, I watched overworked nurses struggle with disconnected information systems, doctors making decisions without complete history, and my grandfather becoming increasingly confused about his own care plan. That experience catalyzed what would become MediSync's mission: to create healthcare technology that serves patients and providers through seamless information flow, not despite it. As I outlined our vision for the future of connected care, I found myself drawing on both MediSync's original clinical focus and elements of user experience that had been HealthStream's strength. The integration of our companies had created something more comprehensive than either original vision, a testament to what could happen when different perspectives align toward a common goal. After the keynote and subsequent panel discussions, the summit transitioned to an evening reception. I circulated among attendees, discussing implementation challenges with hospital IT directors and care coordination opportunities with nursing leaders. These conversations energized me in a way investor meetings never had. These were the people actually using our technology to improve patient care, not just seeking financial returns. I eventually found myself at the bar beside the Chief Innovation Officer of a major healthcare system, one of our newer clients. "Your platform has reduced readmission rates in our cardiology department by 23% in just 6 months, he told me. The clinical data far more gratifying than any stock price movement. That represents real patients getting better care and real clinicians having more time to provide it." "That's exactly the impact we're aiming for," I replied. "If you're open to it, we'd love to document that as a formal case study." "Absolutely. Though I have to ask, how did you manage to integrate the consumer engagement features so seamlessly with the clinical systems?" "That's been the holy grail in health tech for years, but nobody's cracked it until now." Before I could answer, Rachel appeared at my elbow. "Mind if I join this conversation? I overheard you discussing the integration architecture." I introduced them, and Rachel launched into a detailed explanation of how we'd approach the technical challenge. As she spoke, I observed the CIO's growing interest. Rachel had always been a compelling communicator, but now her charisma was channeled into substantive technical discussion rather than personality-driven marketing. The key insight, she explained, was recognizing that we didn't need to force clinical and consumer systems to use identical data structures. Instead, we created a translation layer that preserves the specialized nature of each while ensuring seamless communication between them. That's brilliant, the CIO said. Most vendors try to force everything into a single model, which inevitably compromises either the clinical or consumer experience. Morgan was the one who insisted we maintain the integrity of the clinical data model rather than simplifying it to match consumer needs, Rachel acknowledged, giving credit I hadn't expected. That decision made implementation more complex, but ultimately created a more robust solution. Our conversation continued, the three of us brainstorming potential expansions of the approach to other healthcare domains. It struck me that this, three professionals collaborating on solving meaningful problems, was exactly what I'd always wanted my career to be, stripped of family dynamics and ego-driven competition. Later that evening, as the reception wound down, Rachel and I found ourselves alone on the hotel's lakefront terrace. The Chicago skyline glittered across the water, a fitting backdrop for reflection. "You gave an excellent keynote," she said, leaning against the railing. "Much better than anything I ever delivered at HealthStream." I raised an eyebrow. "That's surprisingly generous coming from you." "I'm learning to give credit where it's due," she replied with a small smile. "Your focus on patient outcomes rather than technology features resonated with this audience in a way my product-centered presentations never could." "Different contexts, different approaches," I offered. "Different values," she countered. "I was selling the dream of health technology. You're delivering its actual purpose." We stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching a boat cross the darkened lake, its lights creating a path on the water. "I've been thinking about our conversation from a few months ago," Rachel said finally, "about what would have happened if we'd collaborated from the beginning. And I think you were right that we weren't ready then. But I also think we would have eventually found our way to something like this, complementary roles that leverage our different strengths." She turned to face me directly. "I've never told you this, but I always admired your technical precision. Even when I was dismissing your business sense, I knew your code was better than anything my team could produce." The admission caught me off guard. "I admired your ability to inspire people," I confessed in return, "to make them see possibilities beyond the present reality. I still do." She smiled, looking younger somehow, freed from the weight of maintaining her perfect image. "Maybe that's the real breakthrough, learning to appreciate each other's strengths instead of resenting them." "Maybe," I agreed. Though I think Dr. Chen would say the real breakthrough is focusing on the work itself rather than our relationship to it. "Wise woman, you're Dr. Chen," Rachel acknowledged. "HealthStream would probably still exist if I'd had an advisor like her. Or if you'd been willing to listen to one," I pointed out gently. Rachel laughed, accepting the criticism without defensiveness. "True enough. Speaking of listening, I've been consulting with the clinical data team on the predictive analytics module, and we've identified an opportunity to significantly improve early detection of sepsis risk factors." Just like that, we transitioned back to work talk, the personal moment integrated into our evolving relationship rather than standing apart from it. This was our new normal, moving fluidly between personal history and professional collaboration, neither defined exclusively by our sisterhood, nor confined to purely business interactions. The summit concluded the following day with roundtable discussions and implementation workshops. As attendees departed, many stopped to share specific ways our technology had improved their clinical workflows or patient experiences. Each story reinforced that we were building something that mattered beyond market valuation or industry recognition. Rachel and I flew back to Minneapolis together, using the time to debrief about the summit, and plan next steps for the initiatives that had emerged from our discussions with clients. It struck me how natural this felt now, working side by side, without the undercurrent of competition that had characterized our entire lives. The pediatric hospital group from Dallas seemed particularly interested in the medication reconciliation module, Rachel noted, reviewing her meeting notes. Their current process involves 7 separate systems that don't communicate effectively. Classic integration nightmare, I agreed. Let's have the implementation team prepare a customized demo that addresses their specific workflow challenges. Already messaged Sanjay about it, she replied. He's gathering their requirements to build a tailored presentation. I smiled at her proactive approach. You're getting pretty good at this solution architecture role. Better than I was at being CEO, she admitted easily. Though some of those skills transfer surprisingly well. The stakeholder management aspect, particularly. We continued working throughout the flight, our conversation flowing between technical details and strategic considerations. By the time we landed in Minneapolis, we had outlined 3 new feature priorities based on client feedback from the summit. As we waited for our luggage, Rachel's phone chimed with a notification. She glanced at it, her expression shifting subtly. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just LinkedIn," she said, showing me her screen. Apparently, today is the 2-year anniversary of me being featured on the cover of Tech Innovators magazine for HealthStream's Series C funding. The memory of that cover, Rachel poised against a stylized digital background, the headline proclaiming her healthcare's digital disruptor, seemed to belong to another lifetime. I remembered how I'd seen it on a newsstand the same day I'd been rejected for a small business loan to expand Medisync's server capacity. Strange how much has changed, I observed. Strange how little that matters now, she countered, pocketing her phone. 2 years ago, I would have shared that as a Throwback Thursday post and collected congratulatory comments. Today, it feels like looking at a different person. Is that difficult? I asked, genuinely curious. Letting go of that public identity you built so carefully? She considered the question as we collected our bags and headed toward the exit. Less than you might think. The external validation was addictive, certainly, but it was also exhausting, always performing success, rather than building it. She glanced at me. What about you? Is it strange being the successful sister now? Having mom and dad brag about your company instead of mine? I laughed. They still introduce you first at family gatherings. Old habits die hard. True, but now they follow with, and Morgan just led Medisync to its most successful quarter ever, instead of the usual, she works with computers. We reached the curb where our respective ride shares would collect us, Rachel to her downtown apartment, me to my home in the quieter Kenwood neighborhood. Sunday brunch? She confirmed before we parted. As always, I agreed. Your turn to pick the place. I was thinking we could try cooking at my apartment instead, she suggested. I found Grandma's waffle recipe while unpacking some old boxes. The mention of our grandmother, who had passed away while we were in college, triggered a rush of memories. Sunday breakfasts at her kitchen table, the two of us temporarily united by our love for her buckwheat waffles with homemade blueberry syrup. I'd like that, I said, surprised by the emotion in my voice. Rachel nodded, her own expression softening. See you Sunday, then. As my rideshare pulled away, I found myself reflecting on this latest evolution in our relationship. From business integration to personal reconnection, we were gradually reclaiming parts of our shared history that had been overshadowed by competition. The following week brought a development neither of us had anticipated. A major healthcare conglomerate approached with an acquisition offer for Medisync, at a valuation that exceeded the combined worth of both our original companies by a factor of 15. The offer arrived with the glossy corporate presentation and aggressive timeline typical of such overtures. I called an emergency meeting of our executive leadership team, including Rachel in her capacity as chief data architect. As we gathered, In the conference room, I laid out the basic terms of the offer without editorial comment. "This is substantial," our CFO said after reviewing the numbers, breaking the stunned silence that had followed my presentation. "It certainly reflects the market's recognition of what we've built," our chief marketing officer added, "particularly the combined capabilities we've developed since the integration." I turned to Rachel, curious about her perspective. As the only person in the room who had experienced both sides of an acquisition, her insight would be valuable. "What are your thoughts?" I asked. She leaned forward, hands clasped on the table. "Two questions we need to answer. First, would this accelerate or hinder our mission to improve healthcare through better technology? Second, are we confident we can accomplish more as part of their organization than we can independently?" Her framing surprised me. No mention of personal financial gain, no focus on the exit prestige that would have dominated her thinking in her HealthStream days. Instead, she had cut directly to the core strategic considerations. "Valid questions," our chief operating officer acknowledged. "Their existing technology stack is significantly less advanced than ours, which suggests we'd spend at least a year managing integration challenges rather than advancing our roadmap. And their incentive structures prioritize quarterly revenue over long-term client outcomes," added our VP of Client Success. "That's fundamentally misaligned with our approach to healthcare partnerships." The discussion continued for 2 hours, methodically evaluating the opportunity from multiple angles. Throughout, Rachel offered insights from her experience while respecting the boundaries of her role, contributing to the analysis without attempting to control the decision. When everyone had shared their perspective, all eyes turned to me for direction. As CEO, the final recommendation to our board would be mine. "I appreciate everyone's thoughtful input," I said. "Based on our discussion, I'll recommend that we decline the offer with thanks. Our mission is better served by maintaining our independence at this stage of our development." Nods around the table indicated general agreement with this conclusion. As the team filed out to return to their regular responsibilities, Rachel lingered behind. "That can't have been an easy decision," she observed once we were alone. "The financial upside was significant." "It was actually simpler than you might think," I replied. "The right choice became clear once we focused on our mission rather than the money." "Still, turning down that kind of offer takes conviction, something you've never lacked." She studied me for a moment. "You know, when HealthStream was approached with acquisition offers, I always evaluated them primarily on what they would mean for my personal wealth and reputation. Patient outcomes were secondary considerations at best. And now? Now I understand that focusing on the mission creates more sustainable value than chasing exits." She smiled ruefully. "A lesson I learned the hard way." "Some lessons can only be learned through experience," I offered. "True. Though in my case, the experience was unnecessarily painful because I refused to listen to anyone who suggested my approach might be flawed." She straightened, shifting back to a more professional tone. "Anyway, I should get back to the data team. We're finalizing the predictive model for readmission risk factors." As she reached the door, I called after her. "Rachel, your input was valuable today. Thank you." She nodded, accepting the acknowledgement without her former need to dominate every interaction. Another small sign of how much had changed. The board unanimously supported my recommendation to decline the acquisition offer. When word got out that we had turned down such a substantial bid, it paradoxically increased interest in our company and our approach to healthcare technology. Industry analysts who had previously overlooked us now sought interviews and meetings, curious about the company confident enough to say no to one of healthcare's dominant players. This attention brought an unexpected opportunity. The American Medical Informatics Association invited me to deliver the opening keynote at their annual conference, a prestigious platform typically reserved for established industry leaders or academic luminaries. The invitation specifically mentioned our innovative approach to integrating clinical and consumer health data as the reason for their interest. I shared the news with Rachel over our standing Sunday brunch, now a regular rotation between her apartment, my house, and occasionally our parents' home when they weren't traveling. "That's a significant recognition," she said, impressed. "AMEA doesn't typically feature commercial vendors in keynote slots. Which is why I'm considering having you deliver it instead," I replied, watching her reaction carefully. "The focus is technical architecture, which is directly aligned with your role and expertise." Rachel looked genuinely startled. "You'd pass up that visibility opportunity?" "It's not about visibility," I explained. "It's about having the right person deliver the right message to the right audience. Your approach to the integration architecture is what they're actually interested in." She fell silent, absently stirring her coffee as she processed my offer. The old Rachel would have jumped at any high-profile speaking opportunity regardless of whether she was the most appropriate presenter. This Rachel was more thoughtful. "We should do it together," she said finally. "You opening with the vision and strategy, me following with the technical architecture. That would present a more complete picture and demonstrate our collaborative approach." It was an elegant solution that embodied the balanced partnership we had developed, neither of us claiming the spotlight exclusively, each contributing our distinct strengths to a shared purpose. "Perfect," I agreed. "I'll suggest that format to the conference organizers." Our parents joined us later that morning, bringing fresh bagels from the deli near their house. As we gathered around Rachel's dining table, I noticed how the dynamics had shifted since our childhood family meals. Our father still asked about work, but now his questions were directed equally to both of us. Our mother still fussed over Rachel, slightly more, but made genuine efforts to understand my role beyond something with computers. "So this conference presentation," our father said after we explained our plans for the keynote, "that's a pretty big deal in your industry?" "It is," Rachel confirmed, "like being asked to deliver a State of the Union for healthcare technology." "And they want both of you," he noted, a hint of pride in his voice. "The Barrett sisters taking the stage together." "Taking it sequentially," I clarified. "But, yes, representing the same company and vision." Our mother reached across the table and placed a hand over mine. "I know I haven't always understood what you do, Morgan, but I want you to know how proud I am of what you've built, of what both of you are building together now." The simple acknowledgement brought a lump to my throat. For so many years, I had craved this basic recognition from my parents. Not that I was better than Rachel, just that my path and contributions were equally valuable. "Thanks, Mom," I managed, squeezing her hand in return. Rachel caught my eye across the table, her expression soft with understanding. She, more than anyone, recognized what that moment meant to me. The weeks leading up to the conference were filled with intensive preparation. Rachel and I worked closely to ensure our presentations would complement each other while maintaining a coherent narrative arc. We scheduled practice sessions where we delivered our content to the executive team, refining our messages based on their feedback. During one such session, Dr. Chen attended as a guest reviewer. After we finished our run-through, she offered her characteristic direct assessment. "The content is excellent," she began. "Clear, compelling, technically sound. But something is missing." "What's that?" I asked, already reaching for my notepad. "The personal journey," she said simply. "How two sisters with competing visions came to create something more powerful together than either could have built alone." Rachel and I exchanged glances, surprised by the suggestion. We had deliberately kept our presentations focused on the technology and its impact, avoiding any mention of our personal history or the acquisition narrative. "The family dimension isn't relevant to the technical discussion," Rachel pointed out. "Isn't it?" Dr. Chen challenged. Your different approaches to healthcare technology, one consumer-focused, one clinically focused, directly parallel your personal dynamics. The integration of those approaches is both a technical achievement and a human one. I considered her perspective. You think we should include our personal story in a professional keynote? Not as the focus, she clarified, but as context that illuminates the broader thesis, that meaningful progress in healthcare technology requires integrating different perspectives rather than forcing a single approach. It was a compelling framing, using our personal journey as a metaphor for the industry's need to bridge consumer and clinical domains. Still, it would require a vulnerability neither of us had previously brought to our professional presentations. We'll think about it, I promised, though the skepticism in my voice was evident. Later that evening, as Rachel and I reviewed our notes over dinner at my house, she returned to Dr. Chen's suggestion. What if she's right? Rachel mused. What if our personal journey is actually relevant to the message? I paused, fork halfway to my mouth. You're considering it. I'm reconsidering my instantaneous rejection of it, she clarified, which is something the old Rachel wouldn't have done. We both smiled at that self-awareness. The thing is, she continued, our industry is full of technical presentations that cover architecture and integration patterns. What would make ours memorable is the human dimension, how different perspectives came together to create something neither could have built alone. It would be a risk, I noted, opening that personal dimension in a professional context. When has playing it safe ever led to genuine innovation? She countered. We're asking healthcare organizations to embrace integration across traditional boundaries. Maybe we should model that vulnerability ourselves. Her willingness to share our complicated history in service of a larger message surprised and moved me. This was perhaps the clearest evidence yet of how much she had evolved from the image-conscious CEO she had once been. If we do this, I said slowly, we need to be honest about the failures as well as the successes. The competition as well as the collaboration. Absolutely, she agreed. The story only has power if it's authentic. We spent the next 2 hours restructuring our presentations, weaving elements of our personal journey into the technical narrative without compromising the substantive content. The result was a more integrated and honest exploration of how competing approaches could evolve into complementary strengths. The evening before the conference, we rehearsed our finalized presentations one last time in Rachel's hotel room. As she concluded her technical architecture section, transitioning smoothly from the personal anecdote about our childhood domino structures to the principles of our integration framework, I felt a surge of pride in how far we had both come. That was excellent, I told her when she finished. The personal context makes the technical architecture more relatable without diminishing its sophistication. Thanks, she said, closing her laptop. It feels strange to be this transparent about our history, but also right somehow. Like the story was always meant to be told this way. We ordered room service and spent the evening talking not about work or family dynamics, but about the future, both for healthcare technology and for ourselves. The conversation flowed easily. Two professionals with mutual respect and shared purpose, rather than siblings defined by rivalry. Do you ever think about what comes next? Rachel asked as we finished our meal. After we've fully realized the current vision for MediSync? Sometimes, I admitted. There are adjacent problems in healthcare that our platform could eventually address, from clinical research to public health surveillance. The integration principles apply across domains. And personally, she pressed, beyond the company? The question caught me off guard. I had been so focused on building and leading MediSync that I'd given little thought to my life beyond work. I'm not sure, I said honestly. This has consumed so much of my energy for so long. Same, she acknowledged. At HealthStream, was always planning my next career move, my next company, my next industry disruption. But it was all about achievement, not fulfillment. She paused, searching for words. Now I find myself thinking about impact more than achievement, about what remains when the accolades fade. It was a profound shift from the sister who had once measured success exclusively in funding rounds and magazine covers. Before I could respond, a text from Dr. Chen lit up both our phones simultaneously. A simple message wishing us luck tomorrow and expressing pride in our journey. She's been such a constant through all of this, I observed. Steadfast in her support, but never afraid to challenge us. We should create a mentorship program, Rachel said suddenly, for young women in health tech. Pay forward what Dr. Chen has given us. I love that idea, I replied, genuinely excited by the possibility. We could structure it as an adjunct to our regular operations, with a focus on technical leadership. Development. We spent the next hour outlining the concept, our complementary thinking styles evident in how Rachel envisioned the program's inspirational elements, while I focused on its practical implementation. By the time we parted for the night, we had sketched the foundation for what would eventually become one of MediSync's most meaningful contributions to the industry. The next morning, as we prepared to deliver our keynote, I found myself remarkably calm. The massive auditorium was filled with healthcare informatics professionals, clinicians, and technology leaders, exactly the audience we needed to reach with our integrated vision. Rachel stood beside me in the wings, reviewing her notes one final time. "Ready?" she asked as the conference chair concluded her introduction. "Ready," I confirmed. "Let's show them what integration really means." Together, we stepped onto the stage to share not just our technology story, but the human journey that had made it possible. Two sisters who had discovered that their greatest strength lay not in competition, but in collaboration. 2 years. After the acquisition, on a crisp autumn morning, I stood in front of MediSync's expanded headquarters in Minneapolis. The glass and steel building reflected the early sunlight, our company logo prominent above the entrance. Employees streamed past me, greeting each other with the easy familiarity of people united by meaningful work. A far cry from the cramped co-working space where MediSync had begun. Today marked a significant milestone, the official launch of our integrated clinical and consumer platform, now implemented in over 200 hospital systems nationwide. The culmination of our vision to bridge the gap between patient-centered care and efficient clinical operations. A vision that had evolved from the merger of two seemingly incompatible approaches. Inside the atrium, preparations for the launch event were underway. Hospital administrators, investors, media representatives, and industry analysts would arrive soon to witness demonstrations of the technology that was already reducing medication errors by 86% and cutting administrative burden on clinical staff by nearly half. I found Rachel in the demonstration area, fine-tuning the interactive displays with our technical team. She had fully embraced her role as chief data architect, bringing the mathematical precision that had always been her strength to the complex challenges of healthcare data integration. Her focus was complete, uninterrupted by the activity swirling around her. The sepsis prediction model needs a more intuitive visualization, she was telling one of our UX designers. Clinicians need to understand the risk factors at a glance, without sacrificing accuracy. I watched as she sketched an alternative display on her tablet, the designer nodding with growing enthusiasm. Rachel had developed a remarkable ability to translate complex technical concepts into accessible visualizations, a talent that had emerged once she stopped trying to be the perfect CEO and focused instead on her genuine strengths. The hospital? Delegation from Mayo Clinic just arrived, I said, approaching once there was a natural break in her conversation. They're particularly interested in the predictive analytics module you've been refining. Rachel nodded, handing the tablet back to the designer with final instructions. I'll join you in 10 minutes. Just want to make sure this visualization update gets implemented before the main demonstrations begin. Her commitment to getting the details right, even minutes before a major event, exemplified how she had transformed from a leader focused on appearances to one obsessed with substance. The change had been gradual but profound, like watching someone slowly shed an uncomfortable costume to reveal their authentic self. I greeted the Mayo Clinic team in the reception area, where Dr. Chen was already engaged in conversation with their chief medical officer. At 72, Dr. Chen remained as sharp and insightful as ever, now serving as chair of our advisory board while mentoring the next generation of healthcare technology leaders through the program Rachel and I had established last year. "Morgan," she said warmly, extending her hand. "I was just telling Dr. Patel about the outcomes from our longitudinal study on medication reconciliation errors." The conversation flowed easily into the clinical impacts of our technology: reduced adverse drug events, improved care coordination, decreased readmission rates, tangible improvements in patient care that went beyond flashy features or marketing claims. This focus on measurable outcomes rather than technological novelty had become MediSync's hallmark in the industry. Rachel joined us shortly, seamlessly, entering the discussion with technical insights that complemented the clinical perspective I had been sharing. We had developed an almost intuitive rhythm in these settings, each knowing when to lead and when to support, playing to our respective strengths without competition or hierarchy. The predictive model you're interested in actually originated from an algorithm Rachel developed at HealthStream, I explained to the Mayo team. We repurposed it from consumer behavior prediction to clinical risk assessment, which only worked because Morgan insisted on maintaining the granularity of the clinical data rather than oversimplifying it, Rachel added. Most companies would have dumbed down the model for processing efficiency. Dr. Patel looked between us, clearly noting our complementary approach. Your integration of consumer and clinical perspectives is exactly what we've been looking for. Most vendors force us to choose between sophisticated clinical functionality and intuitive user experience. We learned the hard way that it's not an either-or proposition, Rachel replied with a knowing smile in my direction. The best solutions emerge when different perspectives inform each other, rather than compete. As we guided the Mayo team toward the main demonstration area, I caught sight of our parents entering the atrium. They had flown in specifically for this launch event, their first time attending a company milestone in person rather than hearing about it after the fact. My mother looked slightly overwhelmed by the corporate environment, while my father surveyed the space with undisguised pride. Rachel noticed them too. "I invited them," she said quietly. "Thought they should see what we've built together." The gesture touched me deeply. Rachel had once jealously guarded her professional accomplishments, using family events to highlight her success while minimizing mine. Now she was deliberately creating space for our parents to witness our shared achievement. "Perfect timing," I replied. "Let's finish with Mayo and then grab them before the main presentations begin." The morning proceeded with a seamless flow of demonstrations, meetings, and media interviews. Rachel and I alternated leading different sessions, each playing to our strengths while supporting the other. The technical team showcased the integration, architecture that combined clinical precision with consumer accessibility, while hospital partners shared real-world impact stories from their implementations. During a brief break between sessions, we found our parents observing one of the interactive displays where a nurse was demonstrating how the system prevented potential medication errors. "Mom, Dad," I greeted them with hugs. "Glad you could make it." "We wouldn't miss it," my father said, his usual reserve softened by evident pride. "This is quite something you two have built." My mother embraced Rachel, then me. "I'm sorry it took us so long to understand what you were doing, Morgan," she said, surprising me with her directness. "All those years when we were focused on Rachel's more visible success, you were laying foundations for something truly important." The acknowledgement, so long awaited, felt both gratifying and strangely unnecessary. Somewhere along the journey from seeking approval to creating genuine impact, external validation had become less crucial than the intrinsic satisfaction of the work itself. "You're here now," I said simply, "and we're building something that matters." "Together," Rachel added, placing her hand on my shoulder, which turns out to be better than competing. Our CTO approached, apologetically interrupting the family moment. "Sorry to intrude, but the Secretary of Health and Human Services just arrived unexpectedly. She's asking to speak with both of you before the main presentation." Rachel and I exchanged surprised glances. The Secretary's interest signaled recognition at the highest levels of healthcare policy, validation that our approach was gaining traction beyond individual hospital systems to potentially influence national standards. "We'll be right there," I assured him, then turned back to our parents. "Duty calls. We've reserved front row seats for you for the main presentation. The team will make sure you're taken care of." As we walked toward the VIP reception area, Rachel leaned closer. "Did you know about the Secretary?" "Not a clue," I admitted. "Must be connected to the longitudinal study results we published last month on reduced Medicare readmissions." The meeting with the Secretary was brief but consequential. She expressed particular interest in how our integrated platform might inform upcoming interoperability standards for healthcare technology, a policy area with far-reaching implications for patient care nationwide. "What's unique about your approach," she noted, "is that it doesn't sacrifice clinical rigor for user experience, or vice versa. Most solutions excel at one at the expense of the other." "That balance comes directly from our complementary perspectives," I explained. "We learned through experience that forcing a single approach creates blind spots." "A lesson with broader applications beyond technology," the Secretary observed with a knowing smile. "I'll have my policy team follow up. Your insights could be valuable as we refine the next generation of healthcare data standards." As she departed for another engagement, Rachel turned to me with an expression of measured excitement. "Policy impact wasn't on my bingo card for today." I laughed. "Nor mine. But it makes sense. The integration challenges we're solving technically have direct parallels in the regulatory framework. From competing startups to potential policy influence," she mused. "Not the journey either of us planned." "Definitely not," I agreed. "But somehow exactly where we needed to end up." We were interrupted by our event coordinator signaling that it was time for the main presentation. The auditorium was filled to capacity. Hospital executives, clinicians, technology, partners, investors, and media all gathered to witness the formal launch of our integrated platform. As we took the stage together, I was struck by the symbolism of the moment. Two sisters with different approaches and strengths, now presenting a unified vision that incorporated the best of both perspectives. The competitive dynamic that had defined our relationship for decades had evolved into a partnership that served something larger than either of our individual ambitions. I began the presentation with our origin story, not the sanitized corporate version, but the authentic journey of how MediSync and HealthStream had started as expressions of our different approaches to healthcare technology before finding greater strength in integration. "Healthcare has traditionally forced false choices," I explained to the attentive audience, "between clinical precision and user experience, between provider efficiency and patient empowerment, between technical sophistication and practical implementation. Our journey taught us that these aren't true dichotomies," Rachel continued, picking up the narrative seamlessly. "Just as Morgan and I discovered that our different perspectives could complement rather than compete with each other, we've built a platform that integrates seemingly opposing priorities into a more powerful whole." We proceeded to outline the technical architecture and clinical outcomes, alternating sections based on our respective expertise while maintaining a coherent narrative thread. The seamless handoffs between us embodied the integration we were describing in the technology itself. After the formal presentation, we opened the floor for questions. A healthcare journalist raised her hand first. Your companies were once direct competitors with fundamentally different approaches, she noted. How did you move from competition to collaboration, and what lessons does that hold for the broader healthcare technology landscape? Rachel and I exchanged glances, silently deciding who should take this one. I nodded slightly, deferring to her. The transition wasn't easy or immediate, Rachel admitted with refreshing candor. It required both of us to acknowledge that our individual approaches had limitations. Morgan's clinically focused platform lacked the user engagement features that HealthStream had developed, while my consumer-centered approach hadn't adequately addressed the complex realities of clinical workflows. The acquisition could have been simply about one approach defeating the other, I added. Instead, we chose to view it as an opportunity to create something more complete than either original vision. That required genuine openness to learning from each other, which, Rachel continued with a small smile, was particularly challenging for me as the acquired company founder. It meant acknowledging that my vision, while valuable in certain aspects, was incomplete on its own. Her willingness to acknowledge this publicly, without defensiveness or qualification, demonstrated how far she had come from the image-conscious CEO she had once been. The authentic vulnerability resonated with the audience far more powerfully than any polished corporate messaging could have. The Q&A session continued with technical questions about implementation timelines, integration with legacy systems, and security protocols. Throughout, Rachel and I maintained our complementary approach, each addressing the aspects within our respective expertise while supporting the other's responses. As the formal event concluded and attendees moved to the networking reception, Dr. Chen approached us at the edge of the stage. "You've created something remarkable," she said, her usual directness softened by evident emotion. "Not just the technology itself, but the model of leadership you're demonstrating together." "We had an excellent mentor," I replied, squeezing her hand gratefully. "I merely pointed the way," she corrected. "You both had to be willing to evolve beyond your initial perspectives. That's rarer than you might think, especially among successful founders." Rachel nodded thoughtfully. "I sometimes wonder what would have happened if Morgan had approached me about collaboration before HealthStream's challenges forced the issue. Would I have been open to it then?" "Probably not," I answered honestly. "And I wouldn't have approached you." We both needed to follow our separate paths before finding common ground. "The timing of lessons matters as much as their content," Dr. Chen observed. "Some truths can only be received when we're ready to hear them." The wisdom of her statement resonated deeply. For all the painful aspects of our competitive history and HealthStream's eventual challenges, the journey had been necessary for both of us to grow into the leaders and partners we had become. The reception flowed into evening, with hospital partners sharing implementation stories, technical teams discussing upcoming feature enhancements, and industry analysts predicting the impact of our integrated approach on the broader healthcare technology landscape. Throughout, Rachel and I circulated separately but remained connected by the shared vision we were advancing together. At one point, I found myself in conversation with the CEO of a major health system who had initially been skeptical of our approach. "I have to admit, I didn't think the integration of consumer engagement and clinical workflows could be accomplished without compromising one or the other," he acknowledged. "But your implementation at Memorial has proven otherwise. The nursing satisfaction scores alone justify the investment, not to mention the reduction in medication errors. It required rethinking fundamental assumptions," I explained, "including our own. The traditional barriers between consumer and clinical technology often reflect organizational silos rather than actual technical limitations. Speaking of which," he said, glancing across the room where Rachel was engaged in conversation with his chief medical informatics officer, "your sister's technical acumen is impressive." Her explanation of the predictive modeling architecture was more accessible than any I've heard, without oversimplifying the complexity. She's always had that capability, I replied. It just became more evident when she focused on her true strengths rather than trying to be the perfect CEO. An insight many of us in leadership could benefit from, he noted thoughtfully. As the event wound down and attendees gradually departed, I found myself standing with Rachel on the small balcony overlooking the now quiet atrium. The evening light filtered through the glass ceiling, casting long shadows across the space where we had showcased the technology that represented our integrated vision. Remember when we used to compete over who got more attention at family dinners? Rachel asked, leaning against the railing. I laughed. You usually won. Until today, maybe. Mom and Dad seemed genuinely impressed by both of us. Progress, she agreed with a smile. Though I noticed Dad still introduced himself to everyone as Rachel and Morgan's father, rather than the reverse. Old habits die hard. At least, now it's Rachel and Morgan instead of just Rachel, with me as an afterthought, I pointed out. I'll take the improvement. We fell into comfortable silence, watching the cleaning crew begin to disassemble the demonstration stations below. The corporate bustle of the day had given way to quiet efficiency as they restored the space to its regular configuration. Do you ever miss it? I asked suddenly. Being CEO? The spotlight? The recognition? The authority? Rachel considered the question thoughtfully, taking time to form a genuine response rather than a reflexive one. Certain aspects, yes, she admitted. The rush of closing a major deal. The satisfaction of seeing your vision take shape. But the constant pressure to project perfect confidence, even when facing uncertainty? The endless performance for investors. And media? Not at all. She turned to face me directly. What about you? Do you ever regret taking on the CEO role for the combined company? Shouldering all that responsibility when you could have remained focused on the technical domain you loved? It was a fair question, one I had occasionally asked myself during particularly challenging leadership moments. I've had days when I missed the clarity of purely technical problems, I acknowledged. But I've come to appreciate that leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions and bringing together diverse perspectives to find solutions. A lesson I learned too late at HealthStream, Rachel said ruefully. I was so convinced I needed to be the source of all answers that I stopped asking genuine questions. Different timing, different lessons, I echoed Dr. Chen's earlier wisdom. We each had our own path to walk. Our conversation was interrupted by a notification on both our phones simultaneously. The first results from the university hospital implementation had just been transmitted. We huddled together over Rachel's screen, analyzing the preliminary data with shared excitement. 32% reduction in clinician documentation time, she noted, scrolling through the metrics. While maintaining comprehensive patient records, that validates our contextual interface approach. And look at the medication reconciliation accuracy improvements, I added, pointing to another set of figures. 94% first-pass accuracy compared to their previous 68% baseline. We continued examining the results, each identifying different aspects of significance based on our respective expertise. The collaborative analysis felt natural now, our different perspectives enhancing rather than competing with each other. We should share these preliminary results with the implementation team tomorrow morning, Rachel suggested. There are optimization opportunities in the workflow notifications based on these usage patterns. Agreed. I'll set up the meeting. And we should consider accelerating the rollout of the enhanced predictive module based on these adoption metrics. We continued discussing technical and strategic implications as we walked toward the exit, our complementary thinking styles evident in how we approached the new data. What once would have been a competition for whose interpretation was correct had evolved into a genuine synthesis of perspectives. Outside, the Minneapolis skyline was illuminated against the evening sky, a fitting backdrop for reflection on the journey that had brought us to this moment. From childhood rivalry to professional competition to reluctant collaboration to genuine partnership, our relationship had traversed territory neither of us could have navigated alone. "Dinner?" Rachel suggested as we reached the parking area. "I'm starving, and we should celebrate today's success." "Absolutely. The new place on Washington Avenue? I hear their chef does amazing things with locally sourced ingredients." As we walked toward our cars, a young woman approached us tentatively, professional attire suggesting she was an attendee from the event. "Excuse me, Ms. Barrett. Both Ms. Barretts," she began, slightly flustered. "I just wanted to say how inspiring your presentation was today. I'm just starting my healthcare informatics career, and seeing how you've integrated clinical and consumer perspectives gives me hope that we can solve some of these seemingly intractable problems." "What's your background?" Rachel asked with genuine interest. "Nursing originally, but I'm completing a master's in data science," she explained. "Everyone keeps telling me I need to choose either clinical practice or technical development, but I believe both perspectives are necessary." Rachel and I exchanged knowing glances. "They absolutely are," I confirmed. "In fact, we're always looking for people who bridge those domains. Do you have a card?" She fumbled in her bag, producing a slightly bent business card that she handed over with nervous excitement. "I would love to learn more about your mentorship program for women in health tech." The panel mentioned it briefly during the afternoon session. "Send me an email tomorrow," Rachel offered. "I lead the technical track of the program, and your background sounds perfect for what we're building." The young woman thanked us profusely. Before departing, her excitement palpable. As we watched her walk away, Rachel turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Remember when we thought success meant proving we were right and everyone else was wrong?" she reflected. "Now it feels more like creating space for others to integrate perspectives we once thought were incompatible." "From competition to collaboration to cultivation," I summarized. "A much more satisfying progression than I would have imagined." "Infinitely more satisfying," she agreed. "Though I still plan to beat you at chess after dinner." I laughed, accepting the friendly challenge. Some things never change, but now we play by the same rules, on the same board, for the joy of the game itself. We walked together toward the restaurant, two sisters who had discovered that their greatest strength lay not in prevailing over each other, but in combining their distinct perspectives toward a common purpose. The journey hadn't been simple or painless, but it had led us to a destination far more meaningful than either of us had initially envisioned. The evening stretched before us, filled with possibilities neither of us could have imagined during those early days of rivalry and misunderstanding. Beyond dinner lay not only chess and friendly competition, but continued collaboration on problems worth solving, healthcare challenges that required both clinical precision and human accessibility, technical sophistication, and practical implementation. In the end, my sister hadn't been entirely wrong when she claimed my tech startup would never succeed. At least, not in the way either of us had originally conceived success. The true victory wasn't in acquisition or market dominance, but in the integration of perspectives that had once seemed irreconcilable. Not in proving one approach superior, but in discovering how different approaches could complement and strengthen each other. As we entered the restaurant together, greeted warmly by staff who recognized us as regular visitors, I reflected on how completely our narrative had transformed. From sisters divided by competition to partners united by purpose, we had written a new story, one where success was measured not by individual achievement, but by collective impact. "To integration," Rachel proposed, raising her glass once we were seated and had ordered. "To integration," I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. "In technology and in life." Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.